Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling overthinking and anxiety today, and we've got some great insights to help us out from clinical psychologist Dr. Julie Smith.
Oh, yeah, I've seen her stuff. She's everywhere these days. It's pretty cool how she explains these big psychological concepts in ways anyone can understand.
Great. You can tell she really wants to make mental health accessible for everyone, which I love. And she doesn't shy away from the tougher topics either.
Definitely not. She dives right in.
Mhm.
So, what exactly are we diving into today? More TikTok videos.
We're actually checking out this great interview she did on the Diary of a CEO podcast. You know that one?
I've heard of it. Yeah, it's like getting a peek behind the curtain, seeing how these super successful people tick, right?
Exactly. And Dr. Smith had some really fascinating things to say about overthinking and anxiety, which, let's be honest, are things that trip up even the most successful people.
For sure. It's like no matter how put together someone seems on the outside, we all have those moments where our brains just won't quit.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the things that really resonated with me that she talked about was this. Imagine you get a bunch of comments on something, right? Like tons of positive feedback. But then there's that one slightly negative one.
Ugh, yeah, tell me about it. It's like that one negative comment just overshadows everything else.
Totally. And our brains just zero in on it like it's the only one that matters. What's up with that? Why do we do that to ourselves?
Right, you would think we'd focus on all the good stuff. I think Dr. Smith mentioned something about how it goes way back, like evolutionarily.
Yeah, she did. Something about our ancestors and survival instincts, right?
Exactly. She was saying that thousands of years ago, if you were rejected by your tribe, you were basically on your own.
Which back then meant you probably weren't going to survive for very long.
Exactly. So being accepted by the group was crucial, like literally a life or death situation.
So that fear of rejection, it's like hardwired into us.
It's primal. And even though we're not living in caves anymore, those ancient instincts still influence how we see ourselves and how we react to things.
Right. So even though logically we know one negative comment in a sea of positive ones doesn't mean we're failures, our brains still kind of freak out.
It's like that old wiring hasn't quite caught up to the modern world. We're still primed to be super sensitive to any hint of disapproval.
So frustrating. It's like
Yeah.
we're stuck on negativity overdrive.
It's true. And that actually leads perfectly to another point Dr. Smith made about self-esteem.
Yeah, I remember her talking about positive affirmations, like looking in the mirror and saying, I am strong or I am capable, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And, those affirmations have become really popular.
I've definitely tried them with, mixed results. Sometimes they help, sometimes they feel kind of silly.
I get it. It can feel a little weird talking to yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Right. But it's interesting because Dr. Smith doesn't totally dismiss positive affirmations.
Really? I thought she might be against them completely.
No, she just cautions against treating them like a magic solution for low self-esteem.
That makes sense, actually. Like, if you're just repeating positive phrases but you don't actually believe them, it's probably not going to stick, right?
Exactly. She's all about being genuine and realistic. So instead of trying to think your way out of feeling insecure, she suggests acting your way into feeling more confident.
Interesting. So what does that look like in practice?
Well, she uses her own experience as an example. Putting herself out there on social media talking about these really personal things was terrifying for her at first.
That's kind of inspiring, actually. You'd never guess she was ever nervous to put herself out there. She seems so self-assured now.
Right. It just goes to show that we all have those insecurities, even people who seem super confident. But it's about not letting those feelings hold you back.
So instead of focusing on silencing those negative thoughts, she's saying, take action even when you're scared.
Exactly. It's like building a muscle. The more you push past that initial fear and do the thing that scares you, the easier it gets over time.
That's such a great analogy. You're not going to get stronger by just thinking about lifting weights. You actually have to do it.
Exactly. And those small acts of courage, those moments where you choose to face your fear, even in little ways, they all contribute to building that confidence muscle.
I love that. Instead of trying to think our way out of feeling insecure, we need to act our way into feeling confident.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can make all the difference.
It's like you're not going to magically become a marathon runner by just thinking about running, are you?
Huh, exactly. You have to actually lace up your shoes and hit the pavement.
And I feel like that applies to so many things in life, right? Facing those fears, big or small, it's how we grow. Which actually makes me think about something else we were talking about before. Like, even those super successful CEOs and entrepreneurs, they struggle with these same anxieties and insecurities too.
Yeah, totally. It's like we often put these successful people on a pedestal, assuming they have it all figured out.
And that they don't ever feel insecure or doubt themselves.
Right. But Dr. Smith is really adamant that it's not about not having those feelings. It's about how you deal with them. And a big part of that, she says, is getting clear on your values.
Values.
Ah.
Okay, so not just like goals we're trying to achieve, but deeper than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's less about what you're doing and more about who you want to be in the world. Like what really lights you up, what gives your life meaning.
Okay. I can see how that would be grounding, especially when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But how do you actually figure out what your values are?
Dr. Smith has this really cool exercise called a values check-in. Have you ever done one of those?
I don't think so unless it's got a different name. How does it work?
So you start by thinking about the different areas of your life. It could be your career, your relationships, your personal growth, whatever feels relevant to you.
Okay, so you've got these different buckets, these different areas of your life.
Exactly. And for each area, you think about the qualities you want to embody. Not necessarily what you want to achieve, but how you want to show up in that area.
Like if we're talking about my career, it wouldn't be I want to get promoted. It would be more like I want to be known for being creative and collaborative. Those are some of my values for sure.
Exactly. It's about identifying those core qualities that are important to you.
Gotcha. So I've got my list of values for each area of my life. What's next?
Then you take a step back and you compare those values to how you're actually spending your time and energy.
Okay, so it's like holding up a mirror to your life, seeing if your actions are actually reflecting your values.
Exactly. It's about noticing those areas where there's a disconnect, where you might be living out of habit or obligation rather than genuine alignment with what matters most to you.
And then once you've identified those mismatches, what then? Is it like a total life overhaul? Because that sounds kind of overwhelming.
That's the beauty of this exercise. It's not about making these huge sweeping changes all at once. It's more about recognizing that even small adjustments can make a big difference over time.
Small changes, big impact. I like the sound of that. It feels much more sustainable too.
Right. And Dr. Smith talks about how our brains are actually wired for those small wins. Like when we take a small action and it gets us closer to our goals or values, it releases dopamine in our brain.
Dopamine, that's the feel-good chemical, right?
Yep. So it creates this positive feedback loop. We feel good, so we're more likely to repeat the behavior. It's like we're literally training our brains to crave those positive changes.
I see. So focusing on those small, achievable steps can actually make us more likely to stick with it in the long run.
Exactly. It's about building sustainable habits rather than relying on willpower, which can be pretty flimsy, let's be honest.
Willpower is definitely not my strong suit, especially when it comes to things like, I don't know, resisting that extra cookie.
Ah, and we've all been there. But the cool thing is, this whole approach takes the pressure off. It's not about being perfect, it's about progress, right?
Progress, not perfection. I love that. It's way less intimidating, too.
Totally. And Dr. Smith walks the talk, too. She talks about juggling motherhood, her career, and now this massive public platform.
And through all that, she's still prioritizing her own mental well-being, which is honestly super inspiring to hear.
It really is. Because it shows that self-care isn't selfish. It's essential. And she's all about integrating those little rituals and practices into your day, no matter how busy you are.
Like finding those small moments to just breathe and reset. Speaking of breathing, she's a huge advocate for breath work, right? And that's something I know you found really helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Breathwork has been a game changer for me, especially for dealing with stress and anxiety.
I have to admit, I used to be a bit skeptical about it. I thought it was all a bit, woo-woo. But then I tried it during this crazy panic attack I had.
Oh, no, a panic attack. What happened?
Yeah, it was at this work conference. Can you believe it? Total nightmare scenario.
Oh, gosh, I can only imagine. A work conference. So stressful. But you used breathwork in the moment.
Yeah, I know, right? I thought it was like a meditation thing you do at home in your yoga pants.
Right. Not exactly something you whip out in the middle of a professional meltdown.
Seriously. But I was desperate. I felt like I was going to pass out or something. And I vaguely remembered reading something about how breath work can help with panic attacks. So I was like, you know what? Why not? Nothing to lose at this point.
What happened?
Honestly, it was like magic. Well, not actual magic, but it felt that way at the time. Like within minutes, I felt that panicky feeling just melt away.
Wow, that's incredible. See, I told you breathwork is amazing. I wish more people realize how powerful it is.
Me too. And the more I read about the science behind it, the more I'm convinced it should be like a a required subject in school or something.
Right. Everyone should know this stuff.
Yeah.
So for those listening who might be new to this,
Mm.
can you explain what's actually happening in the body when we do breath work?
So you know how we were talking about that fight or flight response? How when we're stressed or anxious, our body goes into this whole survival mode.
Yeah, like our heart rate speeds up, we start breathing faster, our muscles tense up. It's getting ready to either fight the danger or run away from it,
Right.
right?
Exactly. But in our modern world, we're not usually running from predators or anything like that. So that fight or flight response gets triggered by everyday stressors.
Right, like a big presentation at work or that awkward social interaction we were dreading.
Exactly. And the thing is, when we're all stressed out, we often don't even realize we're holding our breath or taking these like short, shallow breaths, which just makes the anxiety even worse.
Oh, totally. It's like a vicious cycle.
And that's where conscious breathing techniques come in, because when you slow down and regulate your breath, you're actually sending a signal to your nervous system that it's okay to chill out.
You're basically hitting the brakes on that runaway train of anxiety.
Exactly. And it's amazing how quickly it can work.
It really is. Did Dr. Smith have any tips on which breathing techniques she finds most helpful?
She mentioned one called box breathing. Have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah. That one's a classic. I use that one all the time.
It's so simple, but it works wonders. You basically imagine a box or a square and use each side as a cue for your breath. So you breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and you just keep repeating that cycle.
It's like a mini meditation you can do anytime, anywhere, and no one even has to know.
Exactly. I've used it in all sorts of situations. Before a big meeting, during a stressful commute, even when I'm just feeling overwhelmed at home, it's a total game changer.
Speaking of game changers, this whole conversation about overthinking, values, small steps, and now breath work, it all ties back to something Dr. Smith emphasized throughout the interview,
Hmm.
the importance of human connection.
Oh, absolutely. That really stood out to me too. It's like no matter what aspect of mental well-being she was talking about, it always came back to the importance of nurturing those close relationships in our lives.
It's so true. Those connections with friends, family, even our communities, they make such a difference in our overall well-being.
It's like we're wired for connection. We thrive when we feel supported, seen, and understood.
Totally. And I love how she talked about how those relationships help us regulate our emotions, especially during tough times.
Yeah.
Like when you're feeling stressed or down, having someone to talk to, someone to lean on can make all the difference.
It's like having a built-in support system.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And Dr. Smith also challenged some of those common myths about relationships that we often see portrayed, especially on social media.
Oh, yeah, those unrealistic expectations that relationships should be effortless and conflict-free. It's so damaging.
Totally. And it can make us feel like we're doing something wrong when our relationships inevitably have their ups and downs.
It's like we forget that relationships take work. They require communication, compromise, and a willingness to show up for each other, even when it's hard.
And that's okay. In fact, she argues that those challenges, those moments of friction, can actually make the relationship stronger.
It's about growing together, learning from those bumps in the road, and finding ways to support each other through it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's a big advocate for being honest about what you need and want in a relationship, setting healthy boundaries, and finding a dynamic that works for both people.
Which makes so much more sense than trying to force yourself into some idealized mold of what you think a relationship should look like.
Seriously. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It's just not going to work.
And it's exhausting to even try. You know what I loved about this whole interview? It's not like she gave us a to-do list and said, do this and you'll be happy.
I know, right? It's so refreshing. It felt more like a conversation, like she was inviting us to think differently about these challenges and giving us permission to figure out what works best for our own lives.
Totally. It was inspiring, thought-provoking, and even comforting in a way.
Definitely. And you know what really stuck with me? That question she ended with. What would you do differently if you didn't have to do anything?
Oh my gosh, yes. That question stopped me in my tracks when I first heard it. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It's so powerful. It cuts through all the shoulds and obligations we place on ourselves and forces us to get real about what truly matters.
It's a great question to ask yourself, not just today, but anytime you're feeling stuck or unsure about what direction you want to take your life in.
And who knows, maybe the answer will surprise you.
Maybe it'll spark a small change or a major life shift. Either way, it's a great reminder that we always have choices and we have the power to create a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling on our own terms.
Absolutely. Well said.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive, but wow, we covered a lot of ground.
We did. From overthinking to values to breath work and the power of human connection, Dr. Julie Smith definitely gave us a lot to reflect on.
She really did. So, as you go about your week, we want you to keep that question in mind. What would you do differently if you didn't have to do anything? Don't be afraid to really sit with it, explore those possibilities, and see where it leads you.
You never know what you might discover.
Until next time, keep diving deep.